We had the Rapunzel story, and Rapunzel was a German fairy tale assembled by the Grimm brothers in 1812. It was a adaptation of Frederick Scholl's, who was a professor and who they studied under, until they came out with many fairy tales of their own. And fairy tale Rapunzel was a girl who was named after a plant that her mother ate to give her a healthy. And she's put in a tower where she became pregnant by this man. And after her mother found out, she was banished, where he later found her. And our version was like Tangled the movie, and we did it because it portrayed more to the modern audience, and we all knew the story well. And we created our storyboard pretty easy. Everybody came together and had great ideas about it, and it really helped us in filming. And we followed it to the T pretty much. And I think our video portrayed exactly what we were trying to establish and everything.
So the Grimm brothers were born in 1785 and 1786. They were two of the 9 that their parents had originally had. They were German academics, cultural researchers, and authors. They both attended the University of Marburg in Germany. And from 1812 to 1857, they had 86 stories, going to over more than 200 stories. And out of those, our story was Rapunzel. There were several versions of Rapunzel. The 1812 and the 1857 version both included where Rapunzel was kidnapped, or she wasn't kidnapped. Her parents gave her away in trade of Rapunzel lettuce. She met the prince, and she produced twins and got banished into the desert, where the prince had found her after becoming blind. And the newer versions of Rapunzel don't include those. They aren't that harsh. It does include Rapunzel in the tower, but she gets stolen instead of traded for. And she doesn't get pregnant when she meets the prince, and instead of being banished, she escapes from the tower and gets rid of Mother Gotham, and then goes back to her parents. And they live happily ever after with no kids.
The Grimm brothers were born in Hanau, Germany. Jacob was the oldest out of the two. He was born in 1785, and Wilhelm was born in 1786. The two came from a big family. They had 9 siblings. The brothers went to study law at the University of Marburg. A few years after that, the brothers took an interest in folk poetry, collections of Clem's Brentano. In 1812, the brothers then published Volume 1 of Kinder- und Hausmärchen, which is the children and household tales, commonly known as Grimm Brothers fairy tales. The story of Rapunzel that the Grimm brothers wrote is a lot darker than the Sprite-Punzel story that our group had done. The story of Rapunzel has changed through the years, but it has kept somewhat of the same storyline, which it would be Rapunzel being trapped in the tower and her Prince Charming coming to save her and telling her to let down her long hair. From there, once he saves her from the evil witch who has stolen her from her actual parents. In my group's video, I played the part of Sprite-Punzel. There are a few different versions of the story about Rapunzel now. In this video, you got to see our version, which is basically a spin-off of the Disney version of Tangled. Sprite-Punzel is locked away in her tower by her mother, who is actually an evil witch who stole her from her actual parents, the king and the queen, because she wanted her magical hair. One day, while her mother was out getting her paints for her 18th birthday present, a man named Flynn Rider bombarded her in her tower. He ran into her elevator and startled her while she was reading a book, so she knocked him out with it. From there, she ties him up with her long hair, and she made a compromise saying that she'll give him back the hat that he had stolen from the king and the queen if he promised to take her to see the lanterns. Well, he ditched her in the woods, where her mother found her and took her back to her palace. Flynn then went back to the tower, where her mother had stabbed him. So Sprite-Punzel cut off her hair, killing her mother. Then she went to Flynn crying, and one of her tears brought him back to life. The king and queen had then found out that Sprite-Punzel was alive, and they were reunited, and they lived happily ever after. In our storyboard, we had it to where it showed the main parts of the story, such as the king and the queen with the baby, and then it would go to where the witch was taking her, and then along with Rapunzel being trapped in the tower for years, and then her Prince Charming coming and saving her with his knight in shining armor and his steed, and then from there on that they lived happily ever after. Thank you.
Beginning of fairy tales. It was just oral tradition from passed on by grandmother, great-grandmother to their grandkids, and the Grimm's brothers finally decided they did not want the fairy tales to go extinct, so they began writing them down in 1812. They are very famous now, and still are, and always have been, and they wrote mainly for adults. These fairy tales were not for children. Now, they're mainly for children. But their versions have become into TV shows, like Once Upon a Time. My fairy tale was Rapunzel, and in Rapunzel, it was a man and a woman always wanting a baby. Once they finally got pregnant, she wanted to eat Rapunzel, but the fairy had the Rapunzel in her garden. So, the man and the fairy made a deal that he could have as much Rapunzel as he wanted, as long as she could have the baby. So, she got their baby, named her Rapunzel, then locked her away in a tower. Her hair grew extremely long, and the fairy used that to get in and out of the tower. One day, a prince heard her singing and was like, oh my gosh, how can I get to her? So he waited, and he watched the fairy say, Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair. So the next day, he came back and said, Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair. So she did. Once he arrived to the top of the tower, she was like, oh my gosh, she was so scared because she'd never seen anyone else. So they became very intrigued with each other. And he came back every day after the fairy wasn't there. Then one day, Rapunzel asked her mother, why aren't my clothes fitting? She was like, you godless child, you are never allowed here again. So she was banished from everything into the wilderness. And her mom cut her hair so she could trick the prince. Once she tricked the prince, he also was banished in a way. He threw himself from the tower after finding out Rapunzel was no longer there. And so when he fell, he became blind. And then they found each other in the wilderness years later, and her tears cured him so he could see, and they lived happily ever after. We took our version and we made it just like Tangled, except for we had Rapunzel because we had to drink something, and so we made the queen drink Sprite. So her name was Rapunzel for the symbolism. Just as her symbolism was she ate Rapunzel, so the baby's name was Rapunzel. Then we used an elevator because we couldn't really climb up hair, but for her hair, when she tied up Flynn Rider, we used rope. And then, pretty much the same as Tangled. Our storyboard, we used a castle, and we showed the baby getting stolen, and then her being locked in a tower, then Flynn saving her from a tower, and Mother Gothel dying, and then returning to the kingdom and living happily ever after. We decided that we were going to do it like Tangled because that's pretty accurate of the new time Rapunzel. And it was easy for us. So we all watched the movie and decided to create it just like that. So we got a fake baby doll, and we got a little cradle, and the witch stole her, and it was just really fun for us.
Rapunzel is a German fairy tale in the Grimm's Brothers collection. It was first published in 1812 as a children's and household tale. This fairy tale is for sure told in a different setting of life, with a plant that cures a sick mother-to-be, and an enchantress or a woman who uses magic. The Grimm's brothers, Jacob and Wilhelm, both had at their time a good life going. They lived countryside in Germany and enjoyed that style of life. They were educated at home by private tutors, but later would attend public schools. In the brothers' younger years of life, their father had died, and they had left home to attend a different school that was funded by an aunt. And this school focused on music and foreign language. This is where they became really close with having no man figure as their grandpa had died. These tales that they wrote years ago are still being made into TV shows. For example, a TV show Grimm, and they also turn into cartoons as well. For example, Tangled, or Rapunzel as it was named in the original 1812 version. There are many different versions of Rapunzel, and the original is Rapunzel's mother is craving a plant in the garden over the wall. But after a try by the father, the enchantress asked the father what was going on. And after explaining the situation, she says that he can have as much Rapunzel as he wants, but when the baby's born, the baby must go to her. So deal. Anything to keep my wife okay. Which is kind of different. Then there's the Tangled version from what we based our video over. I honestly think that Rapunzel in any way has been revised is pleasing to the eye of any child. But there's ties that you might not catch firsthand, for example, like the mother and father do criminal acts just to suffice her hunger. The prince and Rapunzel in the original have what in today's terms as we call a booty call, for he just keeps coming over and over and over when the mother's gone. Just things kids don't really understand until an older age. All revisions, they keep a good impact. You do wrong and there are consequences, but true love will prevail. I think for the most part our group viewed Rapunzel just as Tangled being of what our time period is. We chose Tangled because it was in our time of history and when we were younger, the movies that we would watch. So the movie for sure influenced us to choose this version. It was fun. It will be a classic and a book of my eyes now for the movie. Also to influence the modern day audience, not trying to bash older previous revisions, but the style of words, sometimes gets to me and sometimes I'm not really sure what they're saying. Creating the storyboard was pretty cool. Interacting with our group was something I really enjoyed. Our video lined up almost identical with Tangled, and it made our video shooting a nice ride. Assembling of the video is something that I enjoy. We did our video with a narrator speaking, so most of the actual video is silent except for we added music in parts where it was necessary. For example, when Rapunzel sings to the witch to return her young, we added a song, and that's a simplistic but major idea for the video. Putting the music together to match up with the mouth movement was a pretty tough task for me, but I'm aiming to pursue video production and photography, so I need the task. I personally am very satisfied with our video. I think the class enjoyed watching it when we presented, and I think our group had a good time. Our group's vision really wasn't that difficult. We knew we wanted to do Tangled, and our storyboard was made early. So we met one day, and in one day we shot our video, and everything after that's history. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy Sprite Punzel. Thank you.